let me say, apology for the late start. We scheduled to begin at 11 o'clock, but as you all know, technology, we have to account for glitches and so on. So at this point, I would like to welcome, invite our director, Professor Lloyd Waller, to make a few remarks. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Williams. Good morning, everyone. It is my distinct pleasure to bring greetings on behalf of the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute for Social and Economic Studies, SALISES. Today's seminar on climate change, adaptation, and resilience, insights from rural livelihoods in Ghana, a developing country, holds profound significance for the Caribbean region as we too face similar challenges and opportunities in our own development journeys. The work of Dr. Harriet Potakey and Harriet, I hope I pronounced your last name properly. I'm bad at name pronunciations. Will be, in my mind, will provide us with crucial lessons, not only about Ghana, but also about how other developing countries like ours are impacted by the intersect between climate change and economic sustainability and rural livelihoods and community resilience. This kind of multiple discipline, multiple issue, multiple theme understanding of reality has today become a very critical aspect of understanding social spaces and looking at how spaces transition, particularly post-COVID. So as the Caribbean continues to build its capacity to withstand environmental shocks, the insights from this seminar will be instrumental in guiding policy decisions that strengthen the resilience of our economies. Our shared experiences as a developing region makes today's discussion particularly valuable as we explore practical insights for adapting to climate change while fostering sustainable economic growth. I would also like to extend my gratitude to you, Kevin, for chairing today's sessions, and to all the participants for joining us, whether personally or virtually. Together, we have the opportunity to drive critical conversations and actionable solutions that not only protect our natural environments, but also secure the livelihoods of our people across the Caribbean. I wish you all a productive and enlightening session as we work towards building stronger, more resilient Caribbean economies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Waller, for that greeting and welcome. Now, let me also invite Dr. John Challery just to say a few words. Dr. Challery is the current executive director of the UII Global Institute of Climate Smart and Resilient Development. He's a senior lecturer and researcher in computer science at our sister campus, Kville, the UII. A significant part of his ongoing research, publications, and student supervision is in climate modeling, interpretation of climate models, results, and climate scenarios generation. Dr. Challery.
Thank you so very much, Kevin. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, everyone, for joining this seminar as well. I listened to Dr. Waller a short while ago, and I was wondering, should I say anything else beyond what he has just said?
Exactly.
Like he was talking on behalf of JICSA as well. But Kevin, since you have invited me here, I'm here. So let me just tell you a little bit about our institute, the UE Global Institute for Climate Smart and Resilient Development, or JICSA, as we prefer to call it, is very pleased to collaborate with SALISES to share the work that a visiting fellow is doing in climate change among all of our campuses. JICSA, as many of you might know, is indeed a virtual institute that seeks to facilitate and foster linkages with partners to build a climate smart and resilient Caribbean. We recently had talks with the Africa Center of Excellence in Coastal Resilience, ISCOR, from the University of Cape Coast towards establishing some collaborative activities. So it is quite timely and opportune that Dr. Harriet Potakey is visiting with us from the University of Cape Coast. Dr. Harriet, I hope that you feel very welcome here in the Caribbean, because we are talking to you and your people as well. So as our name implies, if the subject is climate smart or sustainable development, then you're talking our language. The pursuits within JICSA is very broad-based and include numerous thematic thoughts such as resilient social policy, finance and regulation for climate smart development, sector resilience and sustainable development, climate science for policy and practice, resilience for higher education institution, resource mobilization, human flora and fauna health, climate justice, etc., etc., etc. I hope you get the point. So we encourage you to reach out to us to engage in any climate-related activities, especially with the University of Cape Coast, where Dr. Harriet Potakey is visiting from. So thank you for allowing us to share a few words on behalf of our institute with you, and I wish you a very productive seminar.
Okay, sorry about that. At this point, I'm going to invite our own Dr. Natover to say a few words on behalf of Global Partnership Network, after which she will introduce our speaker, Dr. Harriet Potakey. Over to you, Dr. Natover.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams, and thank you, Dr. Waller and Charlie, for the wonderful introductory remarks that you provided for us. So good day, everyone, wherever you are, and thank you for joining our joint seminar with the university's Global Institute for Climate Smart and Resilient Development. SALISES is indeed proud to partner with the Global Institute, given our landmark initiatives to try and tackle issues related to climate change and justice, climate and migration, and climate and its impact on Caribbean territories. We're looking forward to Dr. Potakey's insights on climate change and adaptation and resilience, with special reference to rural communities in Ghana. Her topic is an important one and timely for us here in the Caribbean, as we are in the middle of our hurricane season and have already borne the brunt of catastrophic damage from Hurricane Beryl's passage. This storm, which developed from a tropical wave off the coast of Africa in June, ended up as a Cat 4 to 5 hurricane, wreaking deadly and destructive impacts on parts of the Caribbean, the Yucatan Peninsula, and the Gulf Coast of the United States of America in early July this year. The agricultural sectors of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as well as Jamaica, were devastated by this storm. The peoples of the southern islands of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, in particular Union Island and Curacao, as well as those in the northern islands of Union Island and Canoe, as well as those in the northern islands of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique, suffered catastrophic damage to their homelands. Indeed, for us in Jamaica, today, September the 12th, marks the 36th anniversary of another devastating storm. We all know Hurricane Gilbert, Wild Gilbert, that made landfall in Jamaica in 1988. Betwixt and between these several events, we've had in 2017 Hurricane Maria and Irma. We've had the devastating Hurricane Ivan, 2004, and others. The impact of such storms on human lives and livelihoods infrastructure, and housing carries long tails of loss and pain, especially for rural communities who tend to suffer from the highest rates of income, poverty, structural inequality, and environmental insecurity globally. These vulnerabilities are sharply intersected through race, class, and gender dynamics, and helps us to understand the similarities in outcomes between post-catastrophic events or in slow onset processes such as droughts and heat stress in countries across the global south. I expect, therefore, and I agree with Professor Waller, that we will glean much from the offering that Dr. Potakey will provide us today. Please allow me to say a few words of introduction to Dr. Potakey now. She is a research fellow with the Department of Environment, Governance, and Sustainable Development, which is within the School of Development Studies at the University of Cape Coast in Ghana. She received her PhD in Development Studies from this university as well. And her main research interests include climate change, adaptation and resilience, environmental citizenship and behavior, governance and sustainable development, political ecology, as well as research on vulnerable groups with special attention to youth, children, and women. Her most recent research project addressed wetlands and women's livelihoods, examining the nexus between women and mangroves. She has published in a cross-section of journals such as Society and Natural Resources, Management of Environmental Quality, the Journal of Advances in Food Sciences and Technology, amongst others. And she has contributed to several technical reports on the environment and natural resource management. Dr. Potakey is also a visiting fellow at the University of the West Indies and our institute, the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute for Social and Economic Studies. This fellowship was made possible by a South-South Visiting Fellowship program funded by the Global Partnership Network, which both the University of the West Indies and the University of Cape Coast are members. This Global Partnership Network is an assemblage of higher educational institutions and civil society groups that has been created for research, teaching, and training across the SDG 17 goal, which is global partnerships. The GPN research centers on 3 clusters. 1, partnership in development cooperation to promote access, accountability, and deeper participation. 2, partnerships in the global economy with special reference to agriculture, finance, and energy. And 3, partnership in knowledge production, addressing Eurocentrism and fostering alternative knowledges. The GPN is one of the Centers for Excellence for Exchange and Development that is funded by the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development through the Higher Educational Excellence in Development Cooperation Program, EXCEED, and the German Academic Exchange Program, DAD. The GPN is managed by the University of Kassel in Germany and consists of 12 universities and 18 civil society organizations across Africa, the Caribbean, Asia, and Europe. So we're very happy that the GPA has facilitated us to have Dr. Harriet Potakey here today to speak to the important topic of climate change and adaptation and resilience with special reference to rural communities in Ghana.
Okay, let me just say quickly, Dr. Potakey, so you will speak for about 25 to 30 minutes, and at the end of your presentation, then I'll invite the audience to ask you questions. So, right.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Patricia, for the introduction. And thank you all for being present for this presentation. So I think that Patricia has said a lot about where I'm coming from. So I'm a GPN visiting research fellow. I hope my tonation, you can get me. Obviously, my tone is different from everybody else here, but I hope you can hear me. Okay, so that is my topic. Climate change adaptation and resilience, insights from rural livelihoods in Ghana. So in terms of my outline, I want to give a brief background about my institution. Then I will go into the main issues, a brief overview of climate change, the local livelihoods themselves and how they are adapting. And then I will zoom in on the women and mangroves, the empirical study that I did with the World Bank, the support of World Bank. Okay. So a bit has been said about my institution, but I want to add a few more. So the University of Cape Coast is actually located just close to along the Gulf of Guinea. It's just a road, a major highway that is separating the university from the sea. So obviously climate change is very, very important to us. In fact, even some parts of the road going to the Western region is already giving way to the water, the sea waves clearing everything away. So maybe come some years down the line, we may have to find alternative routes or entrance into our place. So that is the University of Cape Coast, within which my department is situated. Now, the Department of Environment, Governance and Sustainable Development under the School for Development Studies actually is situated within the Faculty of Social Science and the College of Humanities and Legal Studies. Now, I'm emphasizing this because I realize that a lot of the people on this platform or listening in today are more or less very much rooted into climate change. You are into the sciences of the climate change. My department, and for that matter, my presentation is not going to focus so much on the sciences, but then the applied sciences, the social issues. So when it comes to, Dr. Charlie was talking about climate change modeling, resilience, and all that. So you are the experts into that. I'm not going to go so much technical. I'm just basing it on the assumption that we all agree climate change is with us from the previous introductory speeches that we've gotten. So just to give you a background of what my department is into so that we know what to expect from the presentation. So I'm not going so much into the science of climate change, but then the social applications or implications of it. So yes, I'm glad ASCOR was mentioned. So we have some sister departments when it comes to climate change. We have the fisheries and aquatic sciences. We have the environmental science department. We have the geography and of course the ASCOR. I'm glad to know that ASCOR is already in, of course, they are very big. African Center of Excellence for Coastal Resilience. So they are also there looking at climate change from various aspects. So the Department of Environment, Governance and Sustainable Development, as the name implies, in addition to our regular teaching, research, and outreach, some of our outreach activities have been in the form of advocacy, sensitization, media engagement on environment-related issues. So particularly related to climate change, we have done some media engagements. The Wetland Day, for instance, which falls on the 12th of February every year, we try to go to the media. But we started last 2 years, and the feedback was very, very revealing. We got to know that not even the excuse me to say uneducated, but even people in academia didn't know that wetlands were very important or they had any value to the ecosystem. So in Ghana, normally wetlands are just seen as wastelands. So you find people filling it with garbage or maybe being filled with laterites for construction purposes. So through this, we realized the feedback, we realized that there's a need for more sensitization. So it has become an annual thing that we do every year. We try to do that. And then this year, we partnered with ASCOR. Of course, they have the resources to now go into the field. So one of the pictures here, we went into the field, a particular wetland where there are some endangered species of some amphibious antelope. I'm told the whole of West Africa, I think that's the only place you can find that species. So we also, together with the Department of Environmental Science on World Environment Day, which is the 5th of June every year, also had a symposium where some students as well as other interested parties came in. And I think the theme this year was on desertification and some other stuff. So we had some discussions, and these pictures are just some of the field activities that we have engaged in. So in terms of our departments, this is just to give you an idea of what we are into. So not so much into the technicalities, but then the social implications, which I think is equally very important. So let's look at the issues proper that is coming into climate change. So when we talk of climate change, by even the introductory comments that have come in, we all agree that climate change is with us and is impacting our societies negatively, and we need to do something about it. So now when it comes to developing countries, we are further disadvantaged in terms of its impact on food insecurity and livelihood losses. More so because of our reliance on climate-sensitive agricultural practices. And in Ghana, the main backbone of our economy is agriculture. So if our outbreak is dependent on climate conditions, then it means that climate change is more or less coming to topple our entire economy if nothing is done about it. So in terms of national efforts, we have some policies that we have to guide our adaptation journey. So for instance, we have the National Climate Adaptation Strategy, and we have some institutions that are in charge of implementing some of the provisions in the policy. So the main ministry is the Ministry of Environment, Science and Technology. That is for climate change issues. And then at the local level, the local government institutions are supposed to ensure the implementations of some of the provisions in there. But then they are also more or less struggling in there because of the political economy of the local governance system, the science biasness of this whole climate change thing. There are people who are still skeptical that whether climate change is occurring or not, and are so sure that it will only take some technical fixes to get it in there. So all these technological or technology phobia things are there as challenges to us. And also the issue of resources to even carry out some of these provisions. And at the household level, issues of financial constraints, sociocultural, technological, as well as limited information on climate change, what to expect, what to do, and all that come in as a challenge. And for that matter, there's the need for us to look at ways and means of adapting to the impacts of climate change. So in terms of the livelihoods that are directly affected by climate change, We have farming, we have fishing, that artisanal fishing, and we have mainly the pastoralism. So with farming, the farming predominantly in Ghana is dependent on, it's rain-fed. You just have a few commercial farms that are doing some form of mechanization or irrigation at most. So most of the farming, the peasant farmers are farming depending on rain and the weather. So once things go wrong, it means that everything goes off. The food insecurity becomes an issue. Most people's livelihoods are lost. So with farming for now, some indigenous practices are embarked upon by rural farmers. So the regular practice of farming has usually been the slash and burn, where farmers during the planting season will cut off the vegetation and burn it. The belief is that when they burn it, they get some potassium to enrich the soil. But with time, in the face of the adverse impact of climate change, you realize that that practice rather is gradually killing the topsoil. So all microorganisms in there are dying, and it's making the soil particles very loose. So with any little wind, all the particles are blown off. So what is being done now is a gradual shift from this entrenched slash and burn method of farming and using more organic manure. So then when these vegetation are cut, instead of burning, it's left there, it serves as green manure. And also once they plant within this fodder, it also conceals the young seedlings from excess evaporation or exposure to sunlight. There are a few climate smart agric interventions where extension officers offer these to farmers, but obviously a lot of the rural poor have no access in terms of drought-resistant crops and the varieties that mature early. But then these first, the agric extension officers are not even enough to go around everybody, and those who have that opportunity will be the few organized peasant farmers who are even into more commercial farms. So normally the target group of interest here gets left out. So then they have to manage on their own with the little indigenous knowledge that they have. With fishing, artisanal fishing, you realize that now the fish catch is dwindling. In fact, ACE-Corps, that is one of their targets, how they are helping, doing a lot of things to see how we can get our fishes back. So a lot of the fishers are not catching much. And for that matter, they are resorting to illegal means, using light to fish, or use small mesh sizes, which are not recommended. So at the end of the day, all the baby fishes are scooped out. And in terms of adaptation, most of them, when there's nothing to do, find themselves going to do some unskilled labor as a way of surviving. And then in terms of the pastoralism too, normally the nomadic herders move around with their cattle, their animals. Sometimes they intentionally burn vegetation so that the regrowth, there's a perception that the regrowth is more juicy and more tender. So the cattle like that. So by that action alone, contributing to climate change. And so it's more like a spiral thing. But in terms of survival, now the movement is a bit limited. The burning is limited. They try to do the dugouts where they can get some water for their animals. And then the mobility too is a bit structured. So move to one side at a point in time, move along. And this have also resulted in some other impacts, conflicts, because then they stray into people's farmlands and all that. So other adaptation measures are mainly, in fact, the main adaptation measure here is the alternative livelihood. So depending on the interests of the rural people, some may go into beekeeping, snail rearing, grass cutter rearing, soap making, and a lot of this. Some NGOs come in, some business units come in to support in this form. And then last but not the least, people will also find themselves migrating, either seasonal migration or they migrate entirely or diversify into any other term that is available. So I spoke about most of the time it is the indigenous practices of planting some trees, intercropping, migrating to allowing some lands to become fallow and then move back. Where the land can no longer sustain planting, then they abandon it entirely and go into something else. Okay, in terms of focus, I said that I'll be narrowing in on women. So when it comes to women and climate change, in addition to all the impacts that I've mentioned earlier on, they are further disadvantaged because they are dependent on these natural resources for their sustenance. Their over-reliance on the climate-sensitive agri that I've mentioned earlier on, and particularly limited mechanization capabilities. Mechanization is seen more as, is gendered, is seen more as something that the males will go into. So the females will not even want to go near them, not to even talk of their finances. And then another thing too that is very insightful is the land tenure. Normally, women wouldn't have the good lands because they don't have access to land. In the land they may be farming on, maybe by proxy, either it belongs to their family, their husband. So most of the time, they find themselves in the marginal lands, which are already stressed by the impacts of climate change. So it makes women and climate change issues further aggravated and want to look into. And of course, associated with that is the girl child, because when it comes to water, collecting firewood and all that, it's usually the girls that do that. So the indigenous knowledge they are also using to try and survive. So studying weather patterns, sometimes some animal behaviors can give an indication of the nature of the rains that will come in a particular season, whether we'll have good rains or not. They will also try to plant some resistant species and all that. So sometimes move entirely, go into some form of petty trading when the lands they farm on can no longer sustain their farming. So now to the empirical issue that I want to zoom in on. So this research on women and mangroves actually were contracted by the World Bank and its partners. So I want to declare that. So some of the insights in there are coming from that. So I need to declare that and also make us aware. So the two main areas in terms of women and mangroves, Chokome and Anyami. Now, Chokome is, you have a pointer. Okay, so the left.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, so I can use. So this is Chokome, and then up there is Anyami in the Volta region. So Chokome is a rural community within the Greater Accra region, the capital of Accra. Gradually, gradually urbanization is creeping in. So the wetlands that these women depend on for their livelihoods are being compromised with these being filled with laterites and building structures coming up. And then with Anyanri, the Volta region. The Volta region happens to be what they call, they say it's below sea level. So already is seriously under threat from the impact of climate change. A lot of communities have long been eroded by the sea, into the sea. So this community has the lagoon on one side coming in, and then the sea too coming. So with time, some years down the line, a lot of these communities around here will be into the sea. And all of them depend on mangroves for their livelihoods. So in terms of methodology, the study design that was used was qualitative. The study areas, as I said, is Anyanri in the Volta region and Chokome in Greater Accra region. So Anyanri, they are mainly into, there's a thick mangrove forest that they are into. They cut the trees and sell them. There's they have two market days in a week where people come from all over to buy wood from this. There's the belief that especially the red mangrove, the rhizophora, has a lot of preservative functions. So those who are using it for smoking, the fish can be preserved for longer time. Those who are using it for construction, it can be kept for termites. So they are depending, I'll talk more on that when I come to the findings. So the target group is the women, both at Chukume, and then the sampling, of course, is purposely because they were specifically targets for this. So they were grouped in focus groups, and so this is just one picture representing that. And then there were a bit of in-depth interviews with some key stakeholders. So we have the Forestry Commission, for instance, which is the state organization. These mangroves are within Ramsar sites. So the Forestry Commission has oversight responsibility over them. And then the NGOs that are working with actually community-based organizations, so I should say CBOs, that are working with these groups too. Some of them were interviewed. And of course, observation, to observe some of the issues at first hand. So the findings, the livelihoods that was realized was that the women were into fuel wood collection and selling. So these pictures, the one to the extreme right, I don't know if I can zoom. Okay, this is not the touch. Okay, zoom. I can type to zoom to. Okay, but I hope you cannot. Okay, that's okay. I hope you can see. So this is Anyanri, and this is a wood or mangrove market where the mangroves are cut and brought here, market days. People come from all over to come and buy and take away. So you can even see a taxi park there. There were others, but then they were not allowing us to take pictures of them. So it's a whole huge market. And that should give you an insight into the volume of mangroves that are being cut. In Chokome, they are into fish smoking and oyster picking as well as crab picking. So these are the mangrove-related activities that they are into. So the woman, the picture, this picture is, she just cut some of the oysters. They are normally stuck to the roots of the mangrove. So they cut them into these small canoes and then send them ashore, and they gently remove the oyster out of it. And then these are fish, normal fish that the women are working on. So these activities have implications on the environment, and for that matter, the very climate change impacts. The mangroves have become very heavily degraded. The The Volta region in Ghana, the western region is the largest, with the largest mangrove vegetation, followed by the Volta region, So with time, they are dependent, and more women are going into the mangrove because the fishing is no longer lucrative. They are not getting the fish catch. So it means that there's more pressure on the mangrove and it's creating a lot of degradation. So in moving from one livelihood loss to the other, more or less like it's further compounding the issue. So buttressing the issue of food insecurity and some social vices too. So this beach, for instance, this side has what we call the closed lagoon. I think about 4 months after we left the field, we were informed by the Forestry Commission officials that the sandbar had caved in. So now this place is no longer a closed lagoon. The sea has eroded the sandbar and now it's an open lagoon, showing how that part is gradually being overtaken by the impact of climate change. So in terms of adaptation, with the support in Chokome, that is the Greater Accra one, with the support of some CBOs, they have been provided with some climate smart ovens so that they don't use too much fuel, that the firewood that creates a lot of smoke into the environment, contributing to the climate change. And in addition to, they've managed to get market outlets for them, where they help them to smoke the fish, and they also trade this. Some, according to them, even have had the opportunity to travel out in partnership with some international NGOs to go and see how some of these things are done. And then with the mangroves, they are into replanting of the mangroves, because the mangroves have become very, very degraded. So some of the women have been mobilized, and then they go out, they pick the seeds that have dropped, and they come and nurse them, and then go and replant. Some of the lands, mangrove lands, too, have become so degraded that it cannot be replanted. It will need an entire re-engineering of the land. But where some replanting can take place, this is going on. And this women's group have a lot of these seedlings waiting to be planted. But another challenge too is that there are issues with land acquisition. So you have this nursery sitting in there, they don't have anywhere to send it yet, because sometimes there's conflict over some of the lands. But then they are making some effort to do replanting in areas where they can. But then majority of them have diversified. And in terms of alternative livelihoods, they suggested a few things, that if they could go into petty trading or be helped with some skills to do if it is the bead making, soap making, those things that I mentioned earlier. They have not benefited from any such yet. But then a number of them too have migrated into the urban areas in search of whatever is available. So those are some of the adaptation measures that this group are having. Now, in terms of resilience, I put question mark there because I see that this whole, in trying to adapt, what the women find themselves doing more or less is also promoting or making worse the impact of climate change. So it's like in a vicious cycle. In trying to adopt whatever is available, they go in there, in this case, the mangroves. And we all know that the mangroves contribute, they are a very good carbon sink, contribute to to sieving out a lot of the carbon in the environment. So if that is the alternative they are going into, then in terms of recommendation, I would say that we should encourage sustainable and alternative livelihood options. So like with the mangroves, they cannot stop entirely because that is what they are into. But if it can be regulated so that they can do it in a sustainable manner. Another realization too is the issue of collaboration and partnership. Because these women are there, they don't seem to know what to do. So like these two groups that we looked at, some NGOs have come in trying to assist them and so expose them to how they can do things better to make a living for themselves. So collaboration is very, very key among the beneficiaries, among institutions, state institutions, academic institutions, and all that. And then last but not the least, the awareness creation has to be there. As I said, even in academic institutions, people are not aware of some of the consequences, particularly with wetlands. So wetlands are being used for all sorts of things, and it's having impacts on us. So we need to increase the education and awareness on climate change and strategies that can be used to adapt. Thank you for listening. So if, I don't know how many minutes.
Okay. Thank you very much for that spirit and informative presentation, Dr. Potakey. So at this point, I'm going to open the floor for questions and answers. So people online, audience online, you have the opportunity to open your mic and ask your questions. You can use the chat option if you wish to type a question, or raise your hand and I'll acknowledge you and allow you to ask your questions. Okay, so let me kick off the question and answer section by asking the first question as the chair, because I'm in charge, right? So I take the first question. Okay, all right. We know that, Ghana is a developing country like Jamaica. So we share all the features. Ghana shares all the features that a developing country has. Okay, so you have there is competing interests for this fierce competition for the limited resource. So my question is, how does the political or the political authority or the political leader, the political leadership in Ghana, does the political leadership take climate change seriously? Okay, because in Jamaica, we see in Jamaica, NGOs have to be, monitoring our government in order to keep them to uphold their obligations in terms of preserving the environment and so on. So, yeah, does the political leadership in your country, in Ghana, for example, take climate change seriously?
Can I or not? Okay, thank you for that question. Obviously, climate change will be of concern, but to the extent that we have some adaptation strategies in terms of policy, I would say that it's taken seriously. But then on the ground, you realize that a lot of the measures that have been rolled out have been informed by donor support, either through the Agric Ministry or through some environment-based NGOs. So I would say that the concern is there, but I realize that a lot of the support to climate change adaptation is coming mainly from donor support. So with that, would I say we are serious or not? The will is there, but maybe the resources to go at it is the challenge.
Okay, 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 I see. Thank you very much for that answer. So it's over to you now, the audience. You can type your question if you wish in the chat option, or you can open your mic and ask a question directly. Any question?
There's a question in the chat.
Okay, there's one. All right, yes. Okay. This question is from John. The question is, what percentage of the farming community in Ghana is made of small independent farmers? And does that make managing practices for sustainability within the changing climate more or less difficult? So that's the first question.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead and answer that one because it's...
Okay. So in terms of percentage, I can say that about 60 to 70%, about 60 to 70% are rural poor farmers. So we have just a few commercial farms and then a few peasant farmers that have come together. But largely, the majority, about 60 to 70%, are what I call the loose ones or the free range. Yes, rural farmers.
Yeah, okay. And the other part of the same question is whether, you know, that percentage, 70% that you refer to, how does that affect the sustainability within the changing climate? You know? Yes.
Yes. Yes, because if you look at the percent, already our agric is heavily dependent, is rain-fed. So anything that happens in there impacts on the climate. And for that matter, any interventions that are made to forestall that will inure to the resilience of the climate. So it's very, very significant. We don't have too many of the regulated commercial farms.
Okay, and the second part of the second question is there a near to medium term projection for the country and communities? Is there a near medium term projection for the country and the communities?
I presume there are, but as to the extent to which we are able to implement what we want to do to be able to achieve this is a bit elusive.
Okay.
On paper, yes, we have medium-term, short-term goals and other plans, but then the implementation becomes a challenge because, as I said, you know, we run a decentralized local government system. And the local or district, what we call the district assemblies, they are the ones supposed to implement some of the provisions of the strategy or the policy, but they are found wanting. Even currently, one of my PhD students is doing a research on that for us to see the institutional capacity to be able to implement these things.
Right. And finally, there's a third part of the question, and it says, the small farm holdings, how does that affect the way of life of these farmers and in general ethnographies?
Yeah, the smallholder farming, that is the dominant feature that we have in there. So you have farmers who are, first of all, farming on subsistence basis, and then the surplus they send to the market. There are some who are farming for the market, but then it's not so much to, let's say, sell out to the international market. So the local is just for the local. So because they form that broad base, anything that happens there impacts on the larger society as a whole.
Okay, great. All right, thank you very much for your responses. Any more questions, please? You can open the mic if you wish, or you can just type your question. Okay, okay, Pat has her hand up. Go ahead, Pat, you can open the mic up.
Yeah, I'm here with Harriet, so I'll just speak.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sure.
Okay, so Harriet, earlier in your presentation, you were looking at the issues of the policies to support climate change adaptation in your country, which is being led by the Minister of Environment, Science and Technology. But you mentioned that there seemed to be some sort of discomfort with science-based approaches to climate change. Yeah, I think you mentioned coming from local government, there was some sensitivity to science biasness of the approaches to climate change. I wonder if you could elaborate a bit on that for me, as well as the concerns that you raise about climate skepticism in the public in Ghana. Could you tell us a bit more about this sense of being uncomfortable with science and the levels of skepticism?
Okay, thank you. So as I said, with the Ministry of Environment and Technology, as the name implies, there are technocrats there who are, how do you call it, science inclined, so are comfortable with this. But when it comes to the local level, that is where the science phobia-ness comes in. So because of the perception that dealing with climate change, we need some science fiction to get it done. So they feel they don't have the capacity to be able to contribute to these innovations that come up. So that is where that fear or the science bias is, because at the local level, we don't have too many of these technocrats there. So that is where the biasness is coming from. And then also about the climate change. There are those who think that it's just the usual climate variability, but it's not climate change. So there are times the weather patterns may change, the temperature and all the other weather conditions change, but then over time they may revert again. So that is where the other level too is coming from. And sometimes, as I said, even within academia, people will be a bit skeptical that climate change is with that. But that is just climate variability, which seems to have been with us since time immemorial. Yeah, so those are the issues there too.
Okay, we have a question. There's a question from Andrea Burnett. And here's the question, Dr. Potakey. It relates to gender and social issues. The question is, how are women supported by government and NGOs to identify and transition into alternative livelihoods, which are more climate smart, but also lucrative, so that both the environment and their families benefit?
Okay.
Let me repeat it.
Yeah.
How are women supported by government and NGOs to identify and transition into alternative livelihoods, which are more climate smart, but also lucrative, so that both the environment and their families benefit.
Okay, thank you. So when it comes to women, as I said already, when it comes to climate change interventions, as women individually, there's not much happening at the state level, but then a lot of the support has rather come more from the NGOs. So like these two groups that I'm talking about is NGO support that is helping them into other alternatives that are more climate friendly. So that is it with the women, because you see the agricultural activities that the women are into is not so, I wouldn't say significant, but it's not so substantial for them to consider as a priority group. So usually a lot of the support, in fact, it's not only women, sometimes other poor or rural farming communities too. It's usually NGO support or donor support that helps them. And a lot of these are going on. There are some that are supported with capacity building training sponsored by these NGOs, so that they can move away from climate dependent livelihoods that will further contribute to climate change. So I would say the NGOs are doing a lot of work in that area.
Okay, good. Any more question, please? Okay, I have one more question for you. In Africa, there is some evidence that climate generates conflict. Okay, and I'm wondering whether, with the erratic and unpredictable change in the climate, whether in Ghana, whether in Ghana, if there is any evidence or any inclination, for the different ethnic, group to, if there's any tension or any possibility of conflict with the different ethnic group, arising from change in climate condition.
Yes, there are, and the very obvious one is with the livelihood. I spoke about the pastoralism. So those who are into these nomads, they normally come from the northern parts of the country, and then they move around with their animals, straying into people's farms, and then other associated vices. So this has created a lot of serious conflicts. That is bringing in ethnic dimensions as well. So you go to the northern part of the Bronga Alpha region, for instance, Yeji, where we have the Ejura areas. That place has a lot of lands. People farm, and these cattle too come in. But with time, some of the cattle owners are migrants, but most of them too are from the northern part. And it has led to very serious conflicts within what I will call the northerners and some of the southerners. So it is very true that has led to killing of people, and in retaliation, the conflicts keep coming up because people, it may start with some herds, animals that are going to destroy people's farm. These farmers retaliate, either go and burn or kill some of the animals. Then there is cross retaliation. Sometimes women, unfortunately, happen to be the victims. When women are on these farms, they get raped, they get shot at and all that. So it makes the conflict keeps escalating. So it is there, and in particular, it's more about the herdsmen who move up around with their animals in search of greener pastures, and the farmers who are, because that part is where the food bank of Ghana, where they grow the cereals, the grains and all that. So yes, conflict is very, very eminent, and already we are experiencing that with the nomadic herdsmen and their movements.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Natoba has her hand up. Go ahead, Dr. Natoba.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to say as well that Dr. Khadija Williams has a question in the chat. Kevin?
Yeah. Okay, so you want to, okay, let me take your question and come back to it.
And then
Okay, here's the question from Khadija Williams. Did your data provide insights into youth participation in climate change adaptation strategies? That's the first question. The second one is, do you have a suggestion as to how indigenous knowledge and pure science could be integrated based on your research and experience?
Okay, thank you. With the youth, I would say that because agriculture is becoming not too lucrative, a lot of the youth in Ghana are not really going into agriculture. So I would say that they as being targeted as playing a role. I don't see that much yet. But then if they find themselves, for instance, in the artisanal fishing, if there are some youth there, then whatever intervention that is targeting these artisanal fishers, they get to benefit from it. But generally, the youth of these days are staying away from agriculture. So I've not seen any policy targeted at them as such. But then if they find themselves in any of these associated groups, then they get to benefit from whatever sensitization or whatever alternative livelihood interventions that's coming. And then
Okay.
the other one
Second part. Do you have a suggestion? Do you have a suggestion as to how indigenous knowledge and pure science could be integrated based on your research and experience?
Yes, maybe a few. For the indigenous knowledge, obviously it has been realized that they cannot be scrapped away entirely, because that is what a lot of the rural folks buy into. So what I have observed with that, with the agric, like for instance on campus, the School of Agric has found a way of integrating some of these indigenous, the practices that are not good, like the slash and burn that I was talking of, the money to help them to move away from that and help them to buy into some of these improved variety species that they are able to generate out of science. So for instance, I know they have done some cassava species that can mature within, I think, 3 to 6 months or so, or by 6 months. And you go into the field, you see a number of the farmers buying into this. They do some workshops to introduce them into some of these science-based researches so that they remove all sort of skepticism or biasness or the phobia around that. So I see the agric institutions doing that. So they buttress the indigenous knowledge that are still relevant, how that can be enhanced and then combined with some of the science-based researches and the products that they are coming out with.
Okay, thank you very much. Go ahead now, Dr. Nortover.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Harriet, my question to you relates to the broader picture. So what you spoke to in looking at the types of negative practices that have been taking place in agriculture, in the mangroves, which are because these communities are not given alternatives, and they're dependent on vulnerable ecosystems to try and carve out livelihoods, vulnerable ecosystems that are also protected in international law through the Ramsar site. But one of the reasons that these communities are engaged in negative activities in terms of their livelihoods impacting on the environment is because there are, as you mentioned, very limited resources available to the women, very limited land available to the smallholders, and very limited opportunities to do differently. Given the fact that these communities are being negatively impacted by climate change and are being forced to engage in these negative behaviors, what role do you think climate justice should play in facilitating a just transition from these activities which are non-sustainable to activities that can lead to transformational change in these countries? So rather than it being a question of donor support or aid, shouldn't it be a question of justice and the distribution of finance in order to support the movement away from unsustainable livelihoods in the context of climate change, given that these countries and these communities were the least responsible for the types of impacts that they're now trying to wrestle with?
Yes, thank you. In fact, it lies squarely in climate justice because, as you said, they are vulnerable already. What they are into is very vulnerable, and the situation has been compounded by that. So yes, it is very true. And in line with that, I know that in research, we spoke to a few of the local authorities about what they were doing to at least ensure that there's some fairness in the system. And the few interventions they are able to make are also dependent on donor funding again. So because then what they get from the central administration as finances are not even enough to cater for the needs. So maybe even if something that has been budgeted for climate change, something else comes up, and then they may have to divert resources. At most, what is done, what I see is a unit within the local government, that is what they call the NADMO, the National Disaster Management Organization. They go in to support victims. Like the Volta region, as I said, they suffer a lot of what they call the tidal waves that can go in, destroy structures and all that. So they just go in to distribute some mattresses and some food items, and it ends there. So I think it lies heavily with resource constraints. So I think that if we find better ways of getting support for this, we could come out of that. And I know that some organization, here again, is about donor funding, are doing that. How women have been entirely, like the Chokome place, how they have been entirely given alternatives, and they are even the ones supporting their families. So yes, it lies in climate justice, but unfortunately, the resources are so limited that the unfairness, the distributional issues are still there.
Okay, good. Any more questions from the audience? Well, it's now almost 12:30. Any more questions? Okay. So if there's no more question, all is left for me to do is to thank our speaker, Dr. Harriet Potakey, for this insightful presentation. Every researcher has something to say about climate change. It's so broad and it's relevant. Okay, it affects our livelihood, right across the world, whether you're in the rich club of OECD countries or you're in the developing world, if you're in the South. Okay, and thank you very much. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience has learned a lot. Okay, so join me in once again. Thank you, Dr. Harriet, for your insightful presentation. I'll just open the video and I give you a virtual clap.
And just want to thank again the Global Institute for Climate Smart and Resilient Development for partnering with us, and the Global Partnership Network for enabling Harriet to be here in Jamaica with us to share her knowledge and her wisdom and to engage with us on our activities, whether it be in research or teaching or future project applications that we hope we can simulate, given the similarities in our circumstances in addressing climate change and trying to get to a better place. So thank you so much again to everyone who supported this seminar, and to our able chair and our director in leading us off and getting us going on a good footing. Thank you also to our technical support, Mr. Richard Leach, and all those who facilitated the marketing and communication of the seminar, which enabled us to have this wonderful conversation today with Dr. Harriet Potakey. So thank you, everyone.